Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today I'm at the Schoolmoor Cemetery looking for a grave for a future blog. But today's case was tried and a man was sentenced over 130 years ago. Now Mark will present the case and I want you guys to share your thoughts and drop me a comment and let me know if you think he was guilty as charged or wrongfully sentenced. Now, before we head towards Bradford East, where it all starts, this is the final installment of a trilogy we've done recently of murders that happened in 1898. And if you missed the previous two installments of the murders, one's called the CANAL murder, one's called Baby in the Box, I'll put them in the description.
Today, Bradford Through The Lens is in the Wapping area of Bradford, and today's story takes us back to 1898. And over there is Stanacre Place, and that's where the story begins. We're going to take you back to the morning of Wednesday, the 18th of May, 1898. Very early in the morning. This alleyway behind me leads to number 77 Stanacre Place, and a chap lived there by the name of George Warden. And at 5:15 on that morning he was returning from work. He was a checker down for the Midland Railway, and as he walked through that alleyway he could hear a commotion and a disturbance coming from number 75. It sounded like furniture was being slammed around the room. The disturbance continued, and Mr. Warden could also hear the sound of a woman moaning, so he thought it was best he should come round to knock on the door to see what was happening. Living at number 75 Stanacre Place was the Hall family. There was Thomas William Hall, who was aged 24, and he was employed by his father as a clothing agent. And Thomas lived there with his wife Emma, who was 25 years old. They'd been married for about 5 years, and they had a son who was 4 years old. Unfortunately, Thomas Hall had something of a reputation as a hard drinker, and sadly the neighbours were quite accustomed to regular disturbances and noises of violence coming from the house. So George Warden came and knocked on the door, and Thomas Hall answered. And Mr. Warden asked him, what did he think he was doing, disturbing the neighbours at that time of the morning. Thomas Hall apologised, said he wasn't even aware it was 5:30 in the morning. Mr. Warden said if it continued, he would have no option but to report him. And Thomas said, do what you need to do. Mr. Warden's wife, Martha, had also heard the disturbance before her husband had returned home from work. She said it sounded like a quarrel was taking place, and at one point she'd heard Emma call out, "Oh Tom, don't," followed by a scream. Another neighbour who heard the disturbance on that Wednesday morning was Eliza Breyer, who was a knocker-up. She was walking around the area tapping on people's windows, getting them up for work. She said she heard foul language coming from number 75. And at one point she heard Thomas Hall say to Emma, "Tha bitch, tha thinks that beauty? Fine feathers make fine birds." A bit further along Stanacre Place, number 55, which is on the other side of this alleyway, there was a young girl called Lily Breyer. She was 12 years old, and she occasionally ran errands for the Hall family. She also played with the young boy. And she would speak of witnessing several acts of violence against Emma Hall on different occasions. There was one time when she saw Thomas strike her with an umbrella. On another occasion, he grabbed her by the throat and thumped her in the mouth. And he was also in the habit of issuing threats to his wife, telling her that she'd better not go out, otherwise she'd see what he was going to do to her. Later on that Wednesday, Emma actually came round here to number 77 to see Martha Warden. And Martha said that Emma appeared to be in an exhausted condition, and she noticed there was discoloration to her arms and also bruising. And at one point Emma produced a handkerchief that was blood-stained. Martha offered Emma a cup of tea, but Emma seemed too weak and she couldn't drink it. Emma Hall had a half-brother. His name was Samuel Smith, and she went to visit him after she'd seen Martha Warden at the shop where he worked to tell him about the violence that she'd suffered that morning. Now, Samuel was aware of the previous acts of violence that had been committed against his half-sister by Thomas Hall. And he'd actually thrashed Thomas for laying a hand on his half-sister. But later that evening, he went round to Stanacre Place and he confronted Thomas and he said, "I hear you've been up to your old antics again." And he removed Emma from the house and brought her here to Bolton Road. And this is where number 717 Bolton Road once stood. And it was here where Emma's mother lived. Emma's mother was called Sarah Nettleton. And when Emma arrived here just before midnight on that Wednesday, Sarah said that Emma appeared to be quite ill and in considerable pain. She was actually holding the sides of her body. But Sarah put Emma to bed and gave her a cup of warm tea. Emma spent the following day, which was Thursday the 19th of May, in bed here on Bolton Road. And Thomas Hall actually came here 3 times during that day to try and convince his wife to come home. But each time Emma resisted because Thomas was clearly intoxicated. And she told him she would only have considered coming home had he been sober and if he was to remain sober. At one point, Thomas became quite quarrelsome, which upset Emma, and she trembled quite violently. And at one point she shouted to him, "No, you are not going to crush me to death." Because she was so upset, Sarah called for a policeman who came and removed Thomas from the house. However, on the following day, the Friday, Emma's condition worsened and she was admitted to the infirmary. We're on Infirmary Fields on the junction of Lum Lane and Westgate, and here is where Bradford's original Royal Infirmary once stood. So Emma was admitted here and she was seen by a Dr. Chapman, who examined her and diagnosed that Emma was suffering with acute septic peritonitis. Emma remained at the infirmary for a number of days, and it was becoming quite clear that her condition was not improving, it was actually getting worse. So the police decided that whilst Emma was able to do so, they would take her deposition, her account of what had happened on that Wednesday morning at Stanacre Place. Emma said Thomas had pulled her out of the bed and dragged her downstairs. She said, "When my husband got me downstairs, he pulled me onto the floor and knelt on me and pressed with his knees on the lower part of my body." It was also stated that Emma was of the belief that she was pregnant and that Thomas Hall had reacted very badly and violently to the news. The statement continued, "I was kicked up. I was 10 or 12 weeks gone in a family way. I've not had a miscarriage before. I have said I would not have a child to him. When I told him I was in the family way, he said, 'We don't want any more kids here. I'll get rid of all those bastards as fast as they come.' I said I would rather die than have another after this treatment. He held me down by the neck with his hands. As soon as I said someone was at the door, he took some handkerchiefs off the sofa and thrust them into my mouth. My husband opened the door, but he would not let them in. He was bad for drink. My husband knocked me about again with his hands and his knees in the same place. I said, 'Tom, what have you done it for?' And he replied, 'Nothing. I've done naught.' We both then got into bed and stayed until 9 o'clock. and I felt very ill and sick and in pain, and I could not bear to lay. That police statement was given on the 24th of May. And the following day, Thomas Hall was arrested by the police, charged with GBH, and he was detained in the cells at Bradford Police Station. But sadly, on Friday, the 27th of May, Emma Hall succumbed to the injuries and she died here at the infirmary. Following the death of Emma at the infirmary, Thomas Hall, who was remanded here at the police station in the town hall, found himself having his charge of GBH upgraded to causing the death of his wife. But it was said that he was acting rather strangely whilst he was being held here, so much so that extra police supervision was imposed upon him. And there was one occasion when a policeman was opening the gate in the cells area to remove some other prisoners that Thomas Hall attempted an escape, and he hit the policeman over the head with a cup. But fortunately, there was another policeman within the cell area, and Thomas Hall was subdued and put back into his cell. A few weeks later, on the 15th of June, Thomas Hall faced the court here at Bradford's Town Hall. And it had been a few weeks since he'd been remanded in custody, and it was noted that during that time he'd grown a beard. But he appeared to be quite unconcerned by the proceedings, and he was sat smiling throughout them. There was a lot of women from the Otley Road area in attendance. It was a packed courtroom, and a lot of them were dressed in black, mourning for Emma Hall. And sobs could also be heard from the public gallery. However, during the hearing, there was a huge question mark over what had caused the death of Emma Hall. Was it the peritonitis that had been diagnosed at the infirmary, or was it a result of Thomas Hall's violent attack, or was it a combination of both? That couldn't be determined here in Bradford, and so the case was transferred over to the courthouse in Leeds for the summer assizes. On Tuesday, the 2nd of August 1898, Thomas William Hall was brought before Justice Grantham and the jury in the courtrooms at Leeds Town Hall. The outcome of the hearing depended on the evidence and the opinions given by several medical experts, including Dr. Chapman, who had attended to Emma Hall at the infirmary. It couldn't be fully determined as to whether or not it was the acute septic peritonitis or indeed the violence inflicted on Emma Hall that had caused her death, but there was little to dispute the fact that Emma Hall was indeed a wife that had suffered terrible domestic abuse at the hands of her husband. And so the judge ordered that the charge of willful murder be reduced to one of manslaughter. And so the jury returned with a verdict of guilty of manslaughter. And Thomas William Hall was sentenced to just 10 years penal servitude. Personally, I think that is disgusting. I think it was murder. So there you have it, the tragic events of May 1898, which began here one early morning at Stanacre Place. Now, sadly, we're unable to take you to a grave. We've no idea where Emma Hall might have been buried. And that was also the case with the Winnie Revel video, if you've seen that one. But you never know. We're hoping to do a follow-up where we can pay our respects properly to Emma Hall. But for now, we hope that she's resting in peace. And if you are a fan of true crime videos, we have plenty on this channel. So if you wish to check out these links, you'll find plenty more of the dastardly deeds that were committed through the years in Bradford. We'll see you on the next vlog.